Alright, welcome back everybody. Today we're going to be doing the Raptor cards. So, Ice Nile, we took the gold off it, and that's because, well, the card text, gain armor equal to your rival's total attack, this is already a very strong card. And the rewards on top of that, I think, were just a bit too much. Not only does Raptor have access to this, really powerful effect, just having the extra gold floating around, like he just seems to be this legend that has a bit of extra gold, and as a result of that, some of the, really strong diamond supports, namely Full Darrock and Barricade, I like to describe as having just a much lower activation energy, so to speak, in Raptor. Basically, Raptor can just put those cards in his deck, and he doesn't have to make any concessions to make them work. He doesn't have to run like an Ali Morrisane to go with the Full Darrock. He just has gold floating around on the cards that are already really good and staple in his deck. Also, we reduced the armor reward to 2. Though, personally, I would just completely delete it entirely and have no rewards, just this card text. I think that is strong enough, but removing the gold is a big deal, so I don't think you can, do that all at once. But I'd be fine with taking all the armor off, especially with the nerfs to the armor destruction cards that I mentioned in the previous video. Next up, we have Anticipation. One of the biggest problems with Raptor currently is the amount of life he can get alongside the armor. I want to talk about diamond cards for a sec. I think one of the design philosophies, surrounding diamond cards is that they need to make the player sort of change the way they play, or, how they just interact with the game. And they can do that through deck building, the old Lady Zay deck before it was nerfed, Lady Raven, Gold Zan. But it doesn't have to be the deck, Full Darrocks and Satifi, make you force your life down, and then you have to interact with the game a bit differently there. And there's lots of other examples, but I just want to talk about Corp Beast. I feel like when they made Corp Beast, it was supposed to be one of those cards. Maybe it was envisioned that you'd have to build a Corp Beast deck. You'd have to build a very specific deck that had enough tools to get your life back up so that you could maximize the value from the Corp Beast. The thing is, though, in the Chronicle we know and love, that's every deck. Life gain just, I think, is a bit too accessible to Raptor. With his 2 copies of Anticipation and his 2 Rock Crabs. He basically has 4 Dagonor Fledglings. For those that don't know, Dagonor Fledgling used to give a 6 life reward. It was very strong, included in almost every deck. And Raptor still effectively has 4 cards on the same power level as that. You don't have to think at all building a deck with Corp Beast in it. I get that he's the tank, the sustain guy, but I feel like hit points specifically, not armor, but hit points should be something that are more precious to him, that are harder to get back, and losing them feels like more of an investment. Let's pretend for a moment that, Rock Crab and Anticipation don't exist. I'm not suggesting that, not by any means, but let's pretend they don't exist. In that world, Corp Beast would be more balanced, because, it would be much more difficult to get the effect off optimally. Your only good low-investment health gain would be Culinarimancer, Romley Weaklax, not so much Dark Crab and Fultetsu, but they do exist. And I didn't say Sir Adamin Brew because that's not low investment. That's very high investment. That's a card that you need to build a whole deck around. But there would be other ways to get your life up, and that's where the game now gets interesting, because we've moved into the realms of actually having to build a deck. We have to think about, how else can I get life? Oh, Count Drainor's a thing, Toxic Blowpipe's a thing, Crystal Flask is a thing, Cabbage might be a thing, and finally Commander Ziliana, right? That's really interesting. Let's say you get a whole bunch of armor, I don't know, from Ice Nile, and then you tank the combat damage from Ziliana on your armor, and then you get that 12 life reward. That's cool. That's the Corp Beast deck I want to know. So I think the fix is, at least without completely redesigning the card to, I don't know, something like your next creature loses attack equal to your rival's total attack. Without completely changing it, I think you just make it more of an investment, not free, and almost strictly better than Cabbage. I mean, Romley Weaklax costs 2, and this is nothing? Really? And now I think with this change, Ice Nile and Anticipation are, very similar cards, except this has a 7/5 body as, that's the requirement, the investment you have to deal with. And Anticipation is a gold cost. This could even cost 2, and it would probably be just as good as Romley. Mind you, Romley's not that top tier, so it's not the best example or comparison. But what would combat the issue better, I think, is just scrapping this 2 life reward and keeping it at 1. But I was speaking to Freb Dekaka, and he convinced me that you probably should leave the 2 life reward, because removing the gold from stuff like Ice Nile, Krazian, and then adding a gold to, Anticipation, you're swinging everything in both directions. But the point is, I don't think it should have a 2 life reward. I think that would combat the issue of Raptor's sustain a bit better. Alright, next up we have Tuzharket. It's the win more card for the Raptor mirror. The cheesy, I'm already winning because I have more armor than you, and now you have no armor as well. Obviously, this has no place in a Chronicle where all of the other effects that do armor, like, remove all of your armor. That's an effect that basically, in these videos, I've been eliminating from the game, and it would become a big problem if it was left as it is. So I changed it to something that I admit is a bit underwhelming, but to be fair, Tuz Harket was never played anyway, and I don't see why it should now, like, be brought back to life. I guess this is an opportunity to bring it to life, but it was never a high power level card, and this one I don't think is either. But the idea is there. If you have the most armor, deal 6 damage to your rival, and it comes with a nice, you know, it makes the card quite low investment to kill, because you get this armor back. But it is interesting because you'll take 5 damage, so you might lose 5 armor, and then the effect, you know, might not resolve because you just lost 5 armor, but then you get the armor back afterwards. So it's like you have to have enough armor for you to fight it and still get the effect to work, which is the interesting thing. I could have been more generous on the amount of damage that it did, or the amount of gold that it gave, or something like that. I think the damage is the operative part of the card, but still the same flavor, just doesn't have the remove all armor clause. Alright, next up is Corporeal Beast, which we've already spoken about with Anticipation. If you perhaps reduce some of the sustain available to Raptor, Corp Beast does get harder to use. Equally though, you could change the stats as well, since, you know, this effect is very strong. If I was going to do that, I would give it more health. I think in RuneScape, this is famous for, like, having one of the highest health values in all of RuneScape, so that would be flavorful for Chronicle. And it'd also just be a good fix, right? Like, currently, the way people kill this is either with Barricade, and then doesn't really matter how much attack you have, or they have, you know, 5 base attack, and they 3-hit kill it, or they have 7 base attack, and they 2-hit kill it. You could easily just give it more health, like, kind of like Gluttonous Behemoth. I mean, the effects are quite similar, in a way. Well, they're not, but you know what I mean. But yeah, if it had like 19 health or something like that, you know, I haven't thought about it too much, then you'd have to 4-hit kill it, which sounds quite interesting. Or maybe, you know, 3-hit kill it minimum. I guess you could 2-hit kill it. That'd be a lot more difficult, though. But it should be a lot more difficult. But at the same time, maybe you don't even change it if the sustain is being changed. Alright, next up, Rock Crab. We've spoken about him already. Basically, old Dagonoth fledgling. I think the configuration is wrong, though. I think if you switch it to 2 life and 4 armor, then this is, like, healthier for the game. I think, like, that life is really valuable to Raptor, as I've mentioned. So just take some of it away and, I guess, replace it with armor. And you'll also notice that the attack has gone up. I think this is probably not what I should have done, though. I do think it needs to be, like, more punishing. Well, not punishing, that's the wrong word. But, like, more difficult to use optimally. Because currently, like, if you're just 2-hit killing this, you only lose 1 life, it's not a big deal. But this is, like, a little bit more of a big deal. I think, though, the health should have gone up to, like, 6 or something. Make it a 1-6 as opposed to a 2-4. Because, you know, rock crabs in RuneScape, people train on them. They're creatures that people, like, train on. And the reason they train on them is because they have very high health, so it takes a while for the creature to die, so you don't have to, like, you know, click on new monster to kill them. In RuneScape, they have high health and very little attack, and that's the important thing about them. And that's actually reflected in the stat line there. This is flavorful, but I think, yeah, maybe 1-6. Next up, we have Barricade. I think this card is overvalued a lot of the time, because, like, there's only one target for it in your deck, and that's Corp Beast, right? I mean, you can use it on other things, but it's definitely not as good on other things. If you end up saving 5 life because of this effect, I think this effect is usually worth about 5 life, then, okay, 4 gold, 15 armor, definitely a good card. I'm not saying it's, like, a bad card, because that's not true. Like, 4 gold for 15 life, that's on the same power level. It's kind of like old Full Tetsu, except you have to, like, combo it with a big creature for optimal efficiency. It also costs 4, so, like, without that creature, and you also need the gold, it can be a bit janky, and, like, I ended up cutting it because of that, honestly. Mind you, at the time, Scarface Pete was very popular, so you couldn't afford any of your cards to be janky. Like, everything had to be playable. And I also cut the White Wolves from that deck because it just felt like, well, you're discarding all my cards anyway. Like, I'll have 1 card left in my hand, I'll play the White Wolf, draw 2, now I've got 3 cards, and then Scarface Pete discards them all. So I thought, you know, what's the point? What's the point in even drawing? Let's just take out all of the janky cards, including the card draw, but, like, let's just make every card, like, a business card. And that means, like, a card that does something. And that worked out pretty good, actually. Mind you, if you're cutting White Wolf, you do have 2 less gold as well. And obviously then, like, you're certainly not going to be able to afford Barricade as easily. And that's also another interesting point, right? Ice Nile, if we take the gold off, like I said earlier, and Krazian, which I've also taken the gold off. Something like Barricade just gets worse. Next up we have Zombie Monkey. Not a very good card, never has been, but that's okay, it's a 1-2, right? I think this effect is fair for its stat line, so it's a balanced card, it's just not a good card. It's not slot efficient, and that's okay. Troll General, though. So I think this card just has, like, a whole bunch of card text that doesn't really know what it wants to be, and then just like, oh, here's 3 gold as well. So given that this guy is a general of presumably the Troll army, he should give you an army. Add 3 Troll Chuckers to your hand. And I really like this because it's unique. The card it gives you already exists in the game, so no art assets have to be created, unlike my Bandos and Kriara suggestions from previous videos. I think it's thematic and flavorful, and it helps Raptor out with an archetype he's struggling in, Aggro Raptor. I get that Raptor's, the tank, the sustain guy, and the, Aggro Raptor, I don't know about that. But he does have aggro tools, like Assault, and he can do an aggro deck. But he does it in his own Raptor-y way, spending armor to deal damage, and I think tanking big creatures to draw good cards. I see no reason why Aggro Raptor shouldn't exist. I think that argument has about as much validity as, oh, Ariane shouldn't be able to play creature cards, she shouldn't be able to have an AP strike deck. It's like, why? I think every legend should be able to play every style, but they all do it in their own, special, unique way. And I think this would be a great way to do that for Aggro Raptor. Plus, I just think it's really cool that, you could add 3 Troll Chuckers to your hand. Like, the raw efficiency of Troll Chucker is just so satisfying, and you get 3 of them. Like, oh, can you imagine the 4 Troll Chucker chapter? It's gonna feel so good to play. Amulet of Fury. No change. Really good card in drafting, and one of the few tools that a gold-based AP sustain deck would have. Like, one of the few good tools. Next up, we have Animated Armor. In the early game, this is like gold generation. If you're on 2 base attack, you end up taking 4 damage, and then you get 2 armor. So, not that good. If you're on 3 base attack, it's a 1 armor gain overall, and then it doesn't really get much better than that until you can one-hit kill it. And then it's like 6 armor and 2 gold. That's really good. But it requires setup. It doesn't work straight away in the early game, and I think that's nice about it. The way I want it to feel is, like, against an aggro deck, like, you want to get up to this magic 6 life total so you can kill Cullies and animated armors and stuff. And once you get to 6, it feels like you've stabilized, and then that's where you start to, get the health back up really fast, and then they can't kill you anymore. I think maybe 6 life could not be enough, because, this is clearly going to be one of the stronger Raptor cards when you take the gold off Ice Nile. You could make this an 8 health creature. I think something might have to give, but this card, I really like it overall. I like that if you have a weapon, it's quite intricate. You can, make use. That's, really satisfying to use. Whereas Ice Nile just feels a bit... It's like, well, yeah, you can predict where their weapon's gonna be, but you don't. You just put it in slot 4, because that's when they're most likely to have the most base attack. There's no thought there. Whereas this one does have that sort of interestingness to it. Next up, we have Armored Zombie. No change here, it's a fine card. The one thing I would like to say, though, is that Undead seem to be these creatures that do damage to your opponent. I think that's a theme that's present. And on the topic of Aggro Raptor, maybe he needs some more tools. I'm not saying Armored Zombie should be it, but, I'm just saying imagine if Armored Zombie said, rival loses 4 life and gains 4 armor. So it's like a net loss of no life for them, but it does 4 health damage, which could be meaningful, because if they die, then you win the game. But, overall, it's not a net life change. And I think you would run that in the Aggro Raptor deck, because, the damage might sometimes be usable, but also the 4 armor will be. And, maybe swapping their health for armor is good, because now you force them into Green Dragon or Raging Calphite. I think there's some interesting things to be explored with a card like that. Next up, we do have Assault. So, literally, the spend requirement went down by 1, and the damage it does went up by 1. I just think, this Assault was just not good enough. It's a 2-life swing overall, because you're losing, 2 life to do this. I think this card would be fine if it said, if you have 2 armor, deal 4 damage. But, the fact that you lose the armor, I don't know about that. I wanted to keep it the same as spend, because I don't want to change, the vision of the game too much. But at the same time, I still think, the damage needs to go up as well. 4 damage is really underwhelming. I wouldn't even put this in an aggro deck. And it's supposed to be an aggro tool. This is now a 4-life swing, which seems fair to me, and it has the requirement of, you need some armor. So it's a conditional card too. I want to keep it to one side, because there's actually some quite interesting synergies further down. So moving on, Bash, by the looks of it, which hasn't changed. This is a fine card. Really good in the aggro deck, but Raptor doesn't really have an aggro deck, so we don't rarely see Bash played except in draft. A fine card. Oh. Same for Berserker Shield. Mind you, Nastroth did go down from 4 to 3 in my suggestions, so I guess that, is still cheaper, but it does have this big old condition. I don't think you could necessarily make this a 1 gold card, though. Something interesting that well, is clearly present in the campaign. It tracks if you drop below, like for example, killing Radimus Urkel, the final boss, to get one of the stars, you're not allowed to drop below 10 life. So the game is clearly able to track that. So I was thinking maybe Berserker Shield could be if you had, I don't know, 10 armor this chapter, gain 1 base attack. You don't need to be on 10 when you get to the Berserker Shield, but providing you were at that number at some point during the chapter, it'll work. Maybe if it does work like that, then you'd increase it from 10 to, I don't know, 15. But the reason I say this is because I find it quite frustrating that when you're going first, you can just put this down in slot 1 and know it will resolve, but when you're going second, you're taking a risk on, am I going to lose some armor here? This might not work. I just don't like that about it very much, and I think, like, if you can change it, that would be nice, but it's not a card that needs changing. Chaos Dwarf, fine card, doesn't need changing, and actually has a really interesting interaction with Grieflinzer. Now that Slime Toes has been nerfed, I think this is certainly a contender over Watchtower guard, which is really nice. Crazed Whaler, fine card, pretty good in Dungeoneering. That flexibility to be used, stealing the 2 gold, can be pretty surprising from Raptor. And also, it's that final fight, you can just play this just before you go into the final fight, and that's valuable too in Dungeoneering. That dual-purpose flexibility. Defense Potion. I think this one just doesn't do quite enough, at least for its cost. Especially when you compare it to, like, other reach tools. So, gave it the same effect as Barricade. When we were making the Dungeoneering community tier list, which was a long time ago now, there'll be a link to that in the description. It's totally outdated, all of the cards are different. But one of the things we spent a long time talking about was, like, the difference between Bunyip and Defense Potion. You think, oh, it's just 1 attack, it doesn't make that much difference. But actually, it makes a huge amount of difference. The number of things that you can reach into with removing 4 attack is actually really big compared to 3 attack. I think the easiest way to describe this is, like, I tried to build an aggro Raptor, and I thought, I can use Defense Potion in a similar way to how Ariane uses Enfeeble. And that works for something like Sergeant Grimspike, but it, like, certainly doesn't work for something with 5 attack, like Ogre Chieftain, I guess now Exiled Calphite Paragon, the new one that I suggested in the previous video, and like a whole host of other 5 health creatures. Even something like Undead Dragon or Tenebra, right? Like, the difference between 3 and 4 attack is quite a lot, and the difference between 4 and 5 attack is still quite a lot as well. And I mentioned Aggro Raptor for a reason. Like, I didn't put just a 1 random armor on there for no reason. I think it has really interesting synergy with Assault now. You Defense Potion and reduce the attack of Ogre Chieftain, and then just before you walk into it, you use Assault. But also, Ogre Trader. Well, not this Ogre Trader. This Ogre Trader. Spend all your armor, then reduce the cost of your next support by 5. So it doesn't matter how much armor you have, but you will always just lose all your armor. But you have to have at least 1, otherwise it won't work. A while ago, I remember Mod Merchant saying that this card's just not that good. Like, it would be, but, I mean, like, spending your armor as money would be really good as a mechanic. And if you could do that, you know, it's definitely cost effective, but, like, you have to put this in a slot, and that means you're, like, you know, you only get 20 slots per game. So, you know, to pay for the cost of the slot, maybe your armor has to be, like, twice as effective at paying for things. So, like, you know, 4 armor would pay for 8 gold, something like that. I don't know what the conversion rate would be, but, like, this clearly isn't good enough. I went with, let's just make this a ramp card. The flavor is that ogres are dumb. They don't know how much armor you have. So, like, no matter, they're just like, give me all your armor, and then you give them all the armor, and then they do the thing. I was thinking, you know, Ariane has Alchemy, Ozan has Darren Lightfinger, Linza has Varrock Museum, and Raptor can have Ogre Trader. That was the idea. Like, just some gold ramp in the early game. And that's where this would be effective, right, in the early game. It's certainly not going to be very good in the late game because you can't start slamming Ice Niles and animated armors and stuff like that. And I like that. It limits it to really just aggro decks. It would be very difficult to put this in like an AP sustain deck because it will just be a dead card in the late game. I think some really interesting synergy it has. As I mentioned with Defense Potion, I wanted to open up some aggro options, so I think Defense Potion will be good, like I mentioned in the same way that Enfeeble is used. But also, let me find him in here. Yeah. This guy, right? Ogre Trader synergizes with the Goblin Brute. You get 1 gold, and then you get your armor, you sell your armor to the Ogre Trader, and reduce the cost of your next support. I'm not sure I'm putting this over here. I want to get the, let me look for it. We'll put him there. This card, right? Steel Titan. There's the other one. No changes, by the way, to that. But it opens it up a bit. Some kind of 3 AP Raptor aggro deck. And Ogre Trader, like, supports that. And I think it needs a bit of support right now. This card is almost never played, except in Dungeoneering. And it's only played there because it gives you AP. Now, I guess sometimes it's played for the 5 damage, but not very often. But this card, like, face value is very, very efficient. It's like stamina potion level efficiency. It just doesn't have a deck to go into. I think we'll leave it there for now, because we have gotten through 20 cards, and the remaining 19, and I think there's still quite a lot to talk about. Raptor, I think, ought to be split up into 2 videos. I think he's worthy of that. Our next card will be Frenzy, which we'll talk about next time. Leave a like if you thought it was interesting, and goodbye.